Afternoon and welcome back to Jeff and the Rabbi. Well, last week's show was so good. I mean, it was one of our biggest shows that we, got a lot of comments on it. The mail was going crazy. In fact, the mail was so big, I figured what we do today is maybe we start out with some viewer mail because last week's show was so big.
Let's
dip
into the mailbag.
I reached in and randomly grabbed a couple letters that I thought we'd read. This is from our
that's pretty good.
hundreds and hundreds of letters.
I actually had a hard time getting in the room because the guy left all the mail bags outside the thing. And I was like,
Rabbi's a little bit behind in his definition of what mail is, but it's okay. It happens. But I think our country's behind in definition of mail too. But that's something totally different episode. So I got some letters here. I'm going to randomly read a few, and I think it's good. Oh, here's a good one right here. Yeah. Dear Sirs, it's kind of professional. Dear Sirs, I like that.
Very respectful.
Very respectful. Dear Sirs, I think that the USA could roll over that Hitler fella, just like the Crimson Tide rolled over LSU this weekend. Look at that. A shout out to Alabama. That's pretty good.
There you go.
That Arab-looking man best not show his face in Huntsville. I think this guy's a little off in his history. These guys aren't around anymore, but that's okay. P.S. I really like that Amish guy. Y'all should keep him. I think he's used by that. That's good. Sincerely, Jim Bob and his sister/wife. Not sure what that means, but...
do the Amish, you have to get rid of them.
You need that. They don't have that.
Get that mustache
out. But I'm not sure what the sister/wife is, but it's something in Alabama.
Got it.
I don't know what that means. I'm not sure. Okay.
Next one.
Next. Dear Jeff. Hey, that's just to me. Yeah. Dear Jeff, great show last week. I thought you were very insightful and charming. Please ask the rabbi to give you more speaking parts. Oh, never mind. Love Mom. She writes it every time. My mother is always writing in letters, but it's all right. We have time for one more letter.
Yeah.
Okay. Ooh, this one doesn't look like a nice one. Actually, no, this is not a good one. You Jews need to stop your complaining about the so-called Holocaust. You control the whole world anyway. Stop whining. Signed M. Gibson, Hollywood, California. Ooh, he's not a happy man, this M. Gibson guy. So, wow. Okay, beside that one, most of the letters were really happy and enjoyed the show.
Right.
So well that I think what we're going to do, we're going to do part two.
Part two. We got to explain it. By the way, today happens to be the anniversary, I guess this would be, what anniversary, I don't know, of the Kristallnacht.
Oh, okay.
Kristallnacht. And Kristallnacht was when Hitler ordered a spontaneous uprising of rioting all across Germany and they burned synagogues, Jewish businesses, smashed windows. That's what crystal, all the glass was smashed all over the place because they smashed in the windows of Jewish stores and things like that. And they would not allow, once the buildings were on fire, they didn't allow the fire departments to put out the fire and the police to intervene and so on and so forth. And ostensibly the whole thing was a natural riot by the people because a German diplomat had been assassinated in France by a Jew. So this was ostensibly an uprising and so on and so forth. One of the results of Kristallnacht, interestingly enough, was that the world didn't really do too much about it. And from that, Hitler, may his name be erased, Hitler got the idea that, people don't really care too much about the Jews, and they don't really care what we're doing with them, and they will pretty much let us go about our business. And that was one of the key points, one of the key turning points that they saw as their green light to go ahead and implement the final solution. Whether they had gotten that far yet or not, we talked about that last time. At what point did they actually figure this out or not? We don't know. But these were all contributing steps as they became more and more comfortable with the fact that the rest of the world really didn't care too much what happens to the Jews.
Kind of scary because, I just thought of it when we mentioned that, you look in the news today or don't look in the news today. Every day another Jew is getting stabbed in Israel, and it's not even making the news anymore. So I wonder if it's kind of the same situation. I don't know if anybody really cares.
Right. Yeah, it's really not. And it's interesting, not only do people not care, but I think, as we see in the media, constantly will portray every time a Jew gets knifed, then they have to balance the story out with the fact that something happened of Jewish oppression to make sure this is, this whole idea of moral equivalency and everything like that.
Oh yeah, it's usually something bad the story starts out, Palestinian killed in Israel. who stabbed the Jew with a knife.
Right.
So, and it's, and that is, it's to show the moral equivalency, because they are responding a little bit too harshly, I think, to people who stabbed them.
Yeah, well, they'll give you the numbers. Right. They'll say, like, there have been X number of Jews killed, and I don't know what the number is, let's say, like, 50 or so. And then they'll say there's been, 100 Palestinians killed. Of course, they don't mention that they do mention, but always, like you said,
very rarely.
Later on in the story, that 50 of those 100 were the people who had just killed the other person, which you could understand why that would get you killed if you just killed someone.
Right.
But, okay, that's the way it goes.
Right.
But, so really the question is, you have these two guys sitting here.
Right.
Okay, one of them is actually going to either he doesn't believe in God, or, in my humble opinion, Hitler, Yamach Shemo, he actually believes in God. He actually wants to fight with him. He's on a rampage against God. He wants to stick it to God. Get out of here, God. He believes in the power of the fittest. He believes in might makes right. And not only does he believe might makes right because might can get away with it, but it would be wrong if might didn't make right. Because how could you give someone all this might and then restrain them through laws and morality and all those things? Might has a right to be right. Right? It has that right. That's why it is mighty. Right. What good is being mighty if you can't be right and show your force and domination? So therefore, all things that are weak must be removed. Weak people, feeble-minded people,
right?
All these various different, certainly people that are born with disabilities of a whole range, mental, emotional, physical, and Jews. Right? Jews need to be given up, as well as all kinds of other undesirable people that they deemed, unfit and second class and all those type of things. And there was a philosophy. And the philosophy was we need to make a good, healthy world. And you need constantly to be culling out the bad ones. Now, in truth, actually, this philosophy actually would find its roots in evolution.
I guess that's
because,
true.
The evolutionary...
That's what it's all about.
If you're an evolutionary believer, then that is the inexorable process going on, so it would only really make sense that we would be culling out the weaker so that we could keep producing a better...
Hitler just wanted to speed up the process a little bit.
Right. And that's social engineering, but, basically it's that, evolutionary concept taken into the social realm.
Right.
But you know what? The bottom line is, what's going on with the other guy? How's the other guy talking to him? Now, the other guy with the rag on his head, so that guy is a real devout God believer.
He definitely believes in God. There's no doubt about that.
Praying, he gives sermons in mosques, and he calls upon people to rise up, always in the defense of God. Allah, always, everything God, and praise be God. He prays. I'm sure he prayed 5 times a day, if not more. Right? I have no doubt. It looks like a pretty, Orthodox Muslim.
I think so. I would call him that.
Very religious, calls for other people to be religious. His position was a religious position. So, how is this guy talking to this guy? Well, as they say, politics makes strange bedfellows. But in truth, did they not really loathe each other? Because one guy is totally anti-God, and the other one is totally pro-God.
And the only thing we know they have in common is they don't like...
And isn't it interesting? Like what they have in common is that they both detest the Jews, which shows that, Jews are sort of like equal opportunity...
haters?
Yeah.
Or
Hades. Right.
Yes.
It can be hated by... It's a beautiful thing about Jews. Anyone can hate them.
Right.
You don't have to be like a particular...
Which is good.
Right. But here's where it gets interesting with these two. And that leads us to this question. Hitler had a philosophy. The Mufti doesn't really have a philosophy, per se. I mean, what's his philosophy? He believes in God. As a matter of fact, when you look at it vis-a-vis the Jews, and why are we talking about this? What brings all this up? If you read the Torah portion this week, Rebecca has twins. She gives birth to twins. One of them is Jacob, and one of them is Esau. And Jacob grows up, as you continue to read in the story, grows up, and he is a tent dweller. He's the studious one. He's the God-oriented one. And Esau is the one who's out in the field, the hunter, the strong man, the worldly guy, and all that. Seems to be more of an earthy type, and Jacob is more of a spiritual type.
Right.
And actually, they're told from the very beginning, Rebecca goes to inquire what's going on. She doesn't get it. How to have these two twins, and they're fighting with each other all the time. And she is told, you have two different nations. You're giving birth to two different nations. And those two are two different nationalities that have two different philosophies. And when one is up, the other's down. Ultimately, one is going to overcome the other. But those two are at odds with each other philosophically. The very essence of one is at odds with the other.
Right.
Esau says, might makes right, conquest, and Jacob says, no, God makes right, and God says, what about the widow and the orphan and all that, okay? So those are two absolutely different philosophies. That's cool, I understand that. Esau, Jacob, Hitler, the Jews, I understand that. Along comes the Mufti. What's the Mufti believe in?
He believes in God. Well, he believes in God. He was a child of Abraham
God,
as well.
man, you got to worship God. You got to pray. You got to do what God wants. You got to follow rules and regulations. God said, got to be like this or that. You know, what's between the Mufti and the Jews? It's like Muhammad. But I mean, philosophically, he believes that there's God. He believes that God speaks to man. He believes God controls what's going on in the world. He believes that God gives instructions to man that man has to live by. The Jews believe in God. They believe that God controls the world, that God gives instructions to man that has to live by. Okay, so now where does it come down to? It comes down to like Muhammad, you know, but philosophically, the two of them could actually see eye to eye.
I mean, there's a lot of similarities there. I mean, it pretty much
is.
And,
you know, and in truth, if the Mufti, you know, Hitler can write a book and publish a book that tells you his philosophy. And the Jews are antithetical to that philosophy. In the Mufti's philosophy, like, why are the Jews antithetical? Like, what is his philosophy? His philosophy is believe in God. Well, Jewish philosophy, at least religious Jewish philosophy, is believe in Torah philosophy, believe in God. What's the deal? So it's very interesting. So this gets us to an understanding of this grand scope of Jewish history. Grand scope of Jewish history. There are 4 empires that rule the world. This is according to our traditional teachings in the Midrash.
right.
4 nations rule the world at 4 different times. They are Babylon, followed by Persia, followed by Greece, and followed by Rome. Each one of them represents a philosophy, and each of those philosophies is opposite Jewish philosophy, but in a different way from each of the other.
Yep.
So in the end, you've got Jewish philosophy and 4 different alternative philosophies. And each one of them has their time in the world where they control the world, and the world goes towards that philosophy. And the Jews have to struggle with that philosophy and decide, do I believe in that or do I believe in Torah philosophy? And ultimately, they overcome it.
So this is basically, I guess you're saying this is when Esau goes up with these 4 things, we go down.
Yep.
We're tempted to go over there, but then we overcome it.
Right, and so different nations. Esau is number 4 of these 4.
Oh, I thought he was 3 and 4, I would have assumed.
You might have thought that. Actually, they say Esau's number 4. He's Rome.
Okay.
He's Rome, and it's very multifaceted Rome. And that's why it lasted the longest, because Rome is a big hodgepodge. You know, because on the one hand, you've got the Christianity, the belief in the Christianity,
right.
And at the same time, you've got the contemporary atheism of much of secular contemporary Western society, which is, I guess you'd say, the heir of the Asaph society. And the Jews have to come in contact with each one of them, and they have to deal with it. They have to decide, am I Jewish or am I into this other philosophy? And they clash with each one, and ultimately they overcame Babylon. They clashed with Persia, and they overcame Persia. That's the Purim story. They clashed with Greece, and they overcame Greece. That's the Hanukkah story. And they clashed with Rome, and we're still like figuring out how they overcome that. But I would hope to say that we have overcome that in such a way that it seems as though we have taken the best that Rome has to offer, and yet we're still standing. So I would hope that we've overcome, but maybe we're still in it, maybe we've overcome it, I don't know. Then what happens? Then along comes Ishmael. Ishmael is Isaac's brother, Isaac's older brother. Now, Ishmael does not represent a philosophy that is antithetical to the Jews. It's not an antithetical philosophy.
It really is not.
No. As a matter of fact, it's really interesting. His name is Yishmael. God will hear. God will hear. That's his name, Yishmael. And he gets that name because of a story. Hagar, his mother, and he were booted out of the house by Sarah. Well, Abraham booted him out, but Sarah pushed him to do it. And the boy is dying. And the angel comes along and he says, don't worry, God heard the boy. Right? And they name him, he's named Yishmael. Okay, God will hear. But he grows up. What does he represent? Other than the fact that it says, it's so interesting, it says that he is a wild man.
Right.
He's a wild man. That's a character trait. By Esav, it says what he does. By Ishmael, it describes who he is.
Oh, that's interesting. Right.
Who he is.
Right.
It's a character trait. Ishmael is not a philosophy. He's got a certain type of character.
Because truthfully, his philosophy is the same as the Jews.
Yes.
Nothing different.
It's not.
Not much.
It's
different.
got that one wrinkle in there. Right. Was Muhammad a real prophet or not?
Right.
Okay. So that's a wrinkle, but the fact that we believe in prophets,
he's monotheistic.
Believe that there's God. God communicates with man. Okay. We both believe in prophecy. So there's an argument about this one prophet. Was he in or out? Right. As a matter of fact, Muslim Islamic philosophy accepts the Torah, understands that the Torah had its place in God's revelation to man, just believes that Muhammad came along and took that a step further. So it's not philosophically a big difference. It's a technicality, big technicality, admittedly, huge technicality, but technical issue. It's not philosophically at odds. It's not like atheism versus God. That's a philosophical difference, right? It's not even Christianity versus Judaism. Christianity has the whole idea of that God had a son. Well, that's a philosophy.
Right.
The God has a son. Do you believe this and that? Can you even have a son? Is it philosophically possible? How do you understand what God is if God can have a son? The Muslims are rigorously monotheistic, as the Jews are. They have no symbols in their mosques. We don't have symbols in our day. They even have less symbols than Jews have. And Jews are very careful about not having symbols of God. So they don't have an antithetical philosophy. What they do have is a personality. They got a personality. And that personality is, they are, as the Torah characterizes them, a para Adam, which is basically a wild man.
Oh, man.
There's a wildness to them. And the problem with the wildness is wildness is always, it can't be constrained.
Because I got to be honest, this guy doesn't look that wild.
Yeah,
he's not looking like he's out there too much.
Right. But they got this wild streak in them. They have a wild streak in them, which is why. Let's just talk about like one of the things that the mufti move. Okay, at one point, the British were in control of Palestine, understanding that they've got a lot of tension brewing here. The Arabs don't like the Jews don't like the Arabs. The British realize that there is like a whole lot of oil under Saudi Arabia. They want to keep the Arabs nice and friendly because the British and, the Shell oil is, bringing all that oil out of the Middle East. The Jews don't really do too much for them. They don't contribute too much. You don't really need Jews. So they're trying to figure out, like, how do we get the thing? But the Jews keep wanting to go to Israel, and they want to go to Palestine. The Arabs want Palestine. So they came up with an idea. What we'll do is we'll have an elective parliament. We'll give them a local parliament. will let them govern themselves under English control, but basically local self-determination. They'll elect a parliament, and they'll be able to make their own laws and run the country as they want to run it. At that time, there was a clear Arabic majority in Israel. There were more Arabs living in Israel than Jews, in Palestine, than Jews.
Right.
So, had they gone ahead with it, what would have happened is the Jews would have elected a certain number of representatives. The Arabs would have elected many more representatives. They would probably sit down. They could start passing laws.
No, that would have been.
And then, there were law after law after law, and the Jews would have been, and the Jews never could have won because they never had the majority. So they presented this idea to the Jews and to the Arabs. The Jews accepted it.
Right.
Crazy, but they accepted it.
Right.
The Arabs turned it down.
Crazier. Right.
Why did they turn it down? We can't sit in any parliament with Jews.
Right.
Can't recognize them.
Right.
Can't sit in the same room. Now, they could have sat in the same room and then legislated them out of existence.
But that would have been too much.
That was just too rational.
So that's what they mean by a wild.
That's a wild man. A wild man, you can always predict the unpredictable. I mean, whatever's unpredictable, that's what you should count on. That's what you should count on.
You got to remember, they did the same thing later on when, okay, well, now here's your partition land. No, we don't want our partition land.
Right.
We're leaving.
Right.
So, and they got up, and by orders of the Mufti and other people like that, they left.
Right.
They left the land.
Right. So these are irrational things. The Torah calls him a wild man. Wild man acts wild. And that's really what they're all about. It's not a philosophy. It's a character trait. It's a way they conduct themselves. So now we've got this situation in Israel. And actually, so philosophically, religiously, how do Jews react to this? So I believe, and I see this more and more and more, Jews say, just saw this from a commentator in the Torah, a Torah commentator going all the way back to like the 1300s, and named the Baal Haturim is what they call him. And he said, it says that at the very end, last week, in last week's Torah portion, at the very last line, it says that Yishmael fell before all of his brothers. Now they translate it in many of the English Bibles as he dwelled, meaning he spread out and he dwelled in front of all of his brothers. But the word technically is he fell before all of his brothers. And the Baal HaTurim says that, ultimately, it's only after Yishmael falls before his brother, Isaac, that things are going to be straightened out. But how does that happen? So the Midrash says, what's going to happen? In the end, Yishmael's going to make the Jews cry a lot. They're going to end up crying a lot.
Right.
And they're going to cry so much, they're going to cry out to God, and God's going to have to save them. So, as opposed to all of the other philosophies that preceded it, which we had to confront and decide, no, we're not Babylonian. No, we don't buy into Greece. No, we don't buy into Rome. Those are philosophical decisions that challenge us, people write books about, that rabbis can preach about and talk about and educate about. What's wrong with Greek philosophy? What's wrong with Roman philosophy? When it comes to Ishmael, there's nothing to talk about. What do you mean, what's wrong with the philosophy? There's nothing wrong with the philosophy. Okay, we disagree about Muhammad, but philosophically, believe in God.
Well, yeah.
But you know what they do? They cause a lot of pain. And that pain will cause Israel to cry out. And when Israel cries out to God, God will hear them. That's the one last thing we got to do. We got to cry out to God. And sadly enough, these guys make people cry.
Not without it. I mean, and it's interesting because your explanation, I guess, is the only explanation that you can put to what's going on with Islam. Like, how do you explain it? How do you explain that okay, we'll give you a state today? I mean, Clinton, he offered them a state. They said no. Right. Not with the Jews next door. We want, if you kill every Jew, then we'll take the state.
Right.
I mean, it's over and over. How do you explain that?
Look at the Ayatollahs in Iran. If I was smart, I would say, okay, I'll tell you what. You're letting us build a nuclear weapon, and you're giving us $1 billion with which to do it.
Or 150 billion.
150 billion, yes. That's silly me.
Billion, please.
Oh, yeah, I'm such a low-ball guy.
What are you talking about?
Okay, so you're giving us $150 billion with which to do it. So you know what I'll do? I'll say whatever you want me to say. Or you know what? I won't even say anything. I'll just not say anything. hand me over the cash and let me go about my business. 10 years from now, I have my bomb. I can wait 10 years. I have my bomb. You paid for it. What a good deal.
You protected it, you paid for it, and you built it.
What a great deal.
Right.
Do you know what they do? You know what they say? It says before we're going to kill Israel, we're going to bomb them, we're going to make a nuclear bomb. What dummies. I mean, they say that straight out.
Even though it hasn't changed, we haven't done anything about it, but still, no, I agree.
Yeah, I guess who's like the bigger dummy?
I'm not really sure.
But it's amazing that they don't, and you know, I would have to say, like if I am President Obama, I got to be frustrated. Because I would think, like, I'm giving you guys
so
everything on a silver platter. All you got to do is just shut up for a little while. Just a little while. And they won't shut up.
Nope.
And you know why they won't shut up? Because they can't contain themselves. They are wild men. This is like the kid, you know, the ADD kid in class, right? He is bouncing off the walls and he's disrupting the whole class. He can't help himself.
I mean, you can give him everything, take everything, give in to him.
He can't help himself, the poor kid, because that's the way he is, right? He can't help himself. He's bouncing off the walls because he's bouncing off the walls. That's the way he is. These guys cannot help themselves. Wow. They are crazy, and you know it's very difficult because you can't really, you know, how do you plan for the person that the only thing that you can plan for them doing is whatever is unconventional or unexpected. And, you know, it's very difficult. So, but that's the way they are. And that causes a lot of pain and a lot of hardship. It's not a philosophy that Israel has to struggle with. So the answer isn't really from us, whereas the answer maybe from the first ones was really from us. We had to confront and overcome. And God wanted to see, can you recognize that philosophy and reject it? But over here, there's nothing really we can do except cry out to God and say, God, Yishmael. You know, it says God will hear. Yeah, you know what happens? This Yishmael causes God to hear. But Yishmael causes God to hear, hopefully, the Jews when they cry out to him.
So truthfully, if you had to choose which the tougher struggle for the Jew, the philosophical or the character trait, I think this one might be a little more tough. This is tougher.
It's really tough. It's really tough because, you know, one of the hardest things to do is to admit that I've got...
Can't do anything about it myself.
Right. Because we always want to figure out, like, what should we do? What can we come to the solution? We should do all this and all that, and, you know, try this and try that. You know, and of course, for Western secularists, it really drives them crazy because they keep saying, oh, yeah, all we got to do is give them more jobs and more education.
That's
and then
right.
You know, but even they, I believe, down deep, have to admit that it's just not working. And even they got to realize, like, these guys are crazy. I'm sure Obama gives them this beautiful deal, and the guy turns around and says, yes, we're going to build a nuclear bomb, and we're going to bomb the Jews. After he gives them this, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. So we might be at that point now where the answer is, you know, again, maybe the only answer is, you know, we got to go to God, and then we got to go to God kind of quick.
Other than that, how else do you do it? Everyone walk around with 3 bodyguards?
That's true.
You know? And you know, like even I believe that even if they packed out of Israel, if we pack up every single Jew and move them out of Israel, you know, I don't know, put them all in Southern California or maybe in North Dakota.
There'll be a lot of Muslims in Southern California.
Yeah, right. I mean, you know, like I don't think that's going to do it.
Right.
I don't think that's going to do it.
Well, interesting. Now, are we done with the Mufti Hill, or are we going for one more?
You know, I think we've pretty much said it now. So I needed to get my last little piece out.
No, but it's interesting because I guess that really
is
the confrontation the Jews have had, at least in the 20th, every century, but at least in the 20th century, and now we might be down to maybe close to the last one.
I hope so.
I hope so.
All
right. Well, if it's not the last one, last conversation, we'll make it till next week. We'll be back next week.
Yeah.
With another episode of Jeff and the Rabbi.